Hi everyone, welcome to a new episode of Carolyn Talks for the So Here's What Happened podcast. And this is a special episode for my coverage of the 2021 Toronto International Film Festival. And as I've done for previous episodes for TIFF, hashtag TIFF 2021, I'll be talking with another friend and a film critic about their favorite film for the festival or one of their favorite films. And today I am joined by DarkSkyLady. She's a great writer and a great critic. And like this film we're gonna discuss today is The Falls by Taiwanese writer and director Chung Mong-hong, whose work I absolutely love. His film A Sun came out at TIFF in 2019 and it was amazing. I wrote about it. You can read the review for it on butwhythepodcast.com. But before we get into The Falls, I will have DarkSkyLady just say a bit about herself and how she got into film criticism, and then we will get into the film. So, DarkSky.
Hi, everyone. My name is DarkSkyLady. I'm a culture writer slash film critic. I got into film criticism a little while after writing societal pieces on Medium, and I love movies. I love watching them. I love discussing them. I love writing about them. So I started writing about them on there, and then I got an opportunity to write a piece on Nerdist. And then after that, it just kind of took off from there.
Great. And so this is something that I asked Hafa in our discussion about The Power of the Dog. Do you remember what your first piece was that was published?
Yes, because it was the first piece published for film review or show reviews was a piece about a show I didn't like. So you never forget the ones you don't like. So it was that Netflix series, I Am Not Okay With This.
I don't think I've seen that one.
Don't bother watching it. No, it was just it seemed like there wasn't a lot of diversity in the cast, which I don't necessarily mind, but you got to make me forget. It's got to be so good that I'm okay with it to an extent that I can look past the flaw. But the one racially ambiguous, light-skinned person that they had, she had no character outside of white people's desire for her, including the lead. So that kind of rubbed me the wrong way. And it was like an 80s type aesthetic. So I was like, you're basically taking all of the bad things from the 80s, like the Breakfast Club and different things like that. And you're not elevating it past that white gaze. So
yeah, that's the thing with Netflix shows. This is something that we talk about constantly. When Netflix has shows centered around Black people, if they're not made in South Africa, like for instance, like Blood and
Blood and
Water,
Water. Yeah.
like first and first, the lead character, especially if it's a woman, if it's a young girl, she's Black, she's usually very light skinned. Like they have a massive problem with colorism, but then
Yes.
also you're talking about like when it comes to these characters interacting with the other white people in their lives, like their race it's supposed to be like, oh, my race doesn't matter, but when you have a Black person surrounded by a whole bunch of white people, race
It's
does
going to
matter.
matter. Yes.
It does matter. And like a lot of these Netflix shows like is like they exist in a bubble, and we're like, this is not real, this is like not how people would react in certain situations.
Exactly.
And like people say things and do things, and it's just like the Black character doesn't react the way I like, even just like taking it back, is like it's just like the passive aggressiveness and the
Yeah.
microaggressions are so commonplace, it like never gets addressed. And then it's just like sometimes I find they even have the white characters being like, oh, they're like supposed to be like, I'm an ally and all these things, and then they still say like passive aggressive ish, and we're like, that's still not okay.
Yeah. That
Right.
reminded me, what was the last one they did? Ginny and Georgia, or Georgia Ginny, thing about
Yeah, I
her.
think it was that one where the mom was white, right? And they moved to like some
Yes.
town.
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah, and the dialogue, and people are like, we don't talk like that. Black people, like, no one says that. No one talks like that in real life, because a lot of the things they were saying was like, you can tell they pulled them off of Twitter. Like they were like
Yep.
hashtags, whatever. You're like, who talks like this? Like, stop it.
Yep.
But that's enough for like these conversations. That's like a whole something I always say, like a whole nother discussion for another day. But today we're gonna talk about The Falls, and one of the reasons we decided to talk about this film is I think I think it's such a great exploration of female friendships, and not only female friendships between girls, but like you can have friendships between a mother and daughter, and like how relationships between mothers and daughters like aren't just like one note. Like you have complexity, there's layers, there's shades, and this relationship between Pin Wen, who's the mom played by Alyssa Chia, and her daughter Xiao Jing, played by Gingle Wang, is very complex. And you're and like
Yes.
these two characters went through so much, and like you see them move like from like kind of like a dark to light shade. Like there's like shades to their relationship, and like we're gonna get into that. But before we talk about all the complexities, which I think is the positives, is there anything necessary that you didn't like about the film? Or like things that you thought could have been done better, like maybe like parts of their relationships that could have been explored.
Mm. Well, it's been a bit since I watched it, but the one thing that kind of stood out to me based on like experiences and stuff, I wasn't sure how I felt about the mental health issue. I understood, and I felt for the most part it was fairly well done in depicting that. But the issue that I had was toward the end when they made it seem like it was almost like a magical thing. Like the reason the mom hears the roaring and has these bouts is because she is getting foreshadowed like what's coming for her daughter, the falls and stuff. So I was like, you had me through the majority and then you kind of lost me a little. Now, had the ending been taken a more dark turn, I would have been more upset. But since it didn't go dark, I was like, okay, I can forgive you a little bit of this.
Yeah, I understand me because I kind of saw like her listening to her hearing the sound of water and roaring. Like to me, like that was a metaphor, a representation of her of how she feels like her life is being like she's
She's
being
being
drowned
swept
out as a person
away.
in her life, and like she's being swept to be away with her life. Because the first time she mentions it is like this is where she's having a discussion with Xiao Jing, and this is the first like really truly open discussion they're having about not only her mental state but about the relationship with the ex-husband, where when he because like she started hearing this roaring in her ears when he was basically when she found out that he was cheating on her, and she was like and she like checked out. That's her brain just was like, I can't handle what you're telling me. I'm gonna just like completely check out of this conversation and this situation. And I understood it, but then in the context of mental illness, I think it needed a bit more in-depth discussion about mental illness and exactly what her mental illness was, because
Yeah, because they just said psychosis, right?
yeah, it's never explained if it's like a type of like
Bipolar, different things
yeah,
like that.
yeah, like
Yeah.
because you're because you're thinking like she's depressed, because I'm thinking, oh, maybe she's depressed like that night when she runs out into the rain. Like that's like when some people, when they get like manic depressive, or when they get or when they're like in an extreme depressive
Yeah.
episode, like they completely disassociate from reality. And
And
that's
they
something
can
that it wasn't
hallucinate.
doing, and that's my problem with it.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree with all that. I didn't have a problem with it until that end. I was like, are y'all really trying to say that mental illness gives you like you can see what's coming in the future?
Well,
Please don't do that to me.
yeah,
Please.
yeah, because the connection to that, I think, kind of it was kind of like metaphorical, because the whole film is like there's so many metaphors in this film, and there's so many metaphors of water, and which I understand, which I actually love, because that's like I love like there's something I say all the time, like I love when directors put like visual metaphors and cues about the storylines and the plots in their films. And like for this it's water, and a lot of it is blue, like shades of blue, like to meant to like her about her depressive state. But you can't, I did have a problem say, okay, yes, she's mentally ill, okay, yes, and she's taking medication for it, so like it's like she received a diagnosis. But then when you're connecting it to like her audit, what you would consider auditory hallucinations, to a premonition of something of impending doom, I kind of like didn't like that, because I understand premonitions, I understand like doom, because I kind of like get those kind of things, like as soon as you know something bad is gonna happen, I
Yeah.
understand that. But tying it to her mental illness and the way she
Yeah.
spoke about her mental illness, I think needed a bit more, either I
Yeah.
think it needed a bit more clarification. So, or so like you can just or and maybe if she had verbally said, I know something's gonna go wrong,
Yeah.
like that could just, that one thing would have made, I think, made a difference. Because but it's not a major like negative about
Yeah,
the
overall, yeah, because overall the rest of it was so good. Like most films are gonna have mistakes or little
yeah,
flaws that you notice. The point is the film so good that I'm okay with those flaws, or I can
exactly.
go, well, despite the flaws, this is still amazing. And for the falls, it's definitely, I really did love it. I really love the depiction of the relationship between mother and daughter. It feels very familiar.
I know, right? So that's also one of the thing one of the reasons I asked you to talk about this because like for both of us, like we were reconnected a lot with this film with regards to the relationship between a mother and daughter. Like for you, like what was it about this film, whatever you're comfortable saying, that made it so relatable for you?
um, I have a family member with mental health issues, so it felt very similar, those peaks and valleys in the relationship, especially when you're young, and also that where you have to assume adulthood a little earlier than you would like. And you have to start taking on responsibilities. You have to start worrying about things that you never anticipated that you would have to be stressing out about, like bills, finances, medication. And so I understood that aspect of it because it was very similar to the aspect I have with my mom. But we're in a good place, so
For me too, I'm the same way. Like I related a lot to the story of mental illness, like personally for me, like and this is just something I'm trying to become more comfortable talking about. And sometimes I wonder, like, do I talk about it too much when I'm talking about films? But I'm like, no, this is how I relate to films. And this is when I think like writers and directors do such a good job that I personally can relate to it. And like for me, like some people know I was diagnosed with MS, multiple sclerosis in 2017, but I also part of that diagnosis I was also diagnosed with clinical depression because like like one of the symptoms of MS can be depression. So I received like because I received an official clinical diagnosis of that, and that was in the same year because I also see a neuropsychiatrist who specializes in like people with like depression and like neurological disorders associated to like things like MS. And then I was also diagnosed in 2019 with seasonal associative disorder, otherwise known as SAD. And that's a form of depression which comes on seasonally. And they kind of related. And that's why I was thinking that Pen One had seasonal depression. And the reason that can come on is because of like your atmosphere, like how outside looks. Like if when outside starts to get dark, like in fall and winter, like
mm-hmm.
that's when it triggers my depression because like your body like chemically just like can't process like it is unable to like tolerate the darkness that your body just like starts to get closed off. And I was
Mm-hmm.
that's what I kind of related to her at because like for the house, like I think what he did so fantastic with this film is like they live in this apartment building kind of like mine, and because
Okay.
they're in quarantine, and like once they leave work and school, like they go home and they stay home. But then because the building is under construction and renovation, like the entire building is sheathed in this blue tarp, like from
Yeah.
top to bottom. So like once they go inside, it's depressive, right? It's like
Mm-hmm.
dark and it's blue, and like blue can be like depressive for can be a representation of like in films, especially a lot for people who
Yeah.
are sad and depressed. So like they're in this atmosphere. And then like for Pin One, like she has all of these things going on. She's like trying to raise her daughter. She has stress at work. She hasn't coped with the loss of her husband moving out. And just like I kind of saw that as like her brain just started to be like, I can't tolerate this, like I can't do with all this darkness. And then she just starts to disassociate. So I related a lot to that because like winter is a struggle for me to get through. And like the longer winter lasts, the harder it can be for me. So I related a lot to that. But then also the relationship between like the mother and the daughter. Like me, I love my mom, but me and my mom can have like some very
Parents are
tumultuous
parents.
times in our relationships. And that's one of the things I think they did so well with this film. Like this screenplay was also written by Yao Shang Chang, and like they explore the relationships between the mothers and daughters very, I think, well in this film because it's like you love each other, but like you also can't get along with each other.
No, yeah, that's very, very true. Um, and it's just also, even as you grow and assume responsibility, especially when you assume it too early, the parent will still, even if they have mental health issues, they'll still occasionally be like, I'm the parent. I tell you what's happening, not you telling me what's going to go on. So it's always a little bit more challenging. to relate to a parent when you're also having to assume the roles of a parent to an extent.
Yeah, because that's with the falls and like with just even the title of the name, like I think it represents the fall of so many things. Like it's like we think it's about the water and the representation of this waterfall at the end of the film, but I think it's also about like I think like almost like the fall or the collapse of society because like and how that affects relationships because like this film was filmed, this takes place during the pandemic and like so
Yeah.
many things for so many people fell apart during the pandemic, right? Like their family fell
Yeah.
apart and then like they're like the mom is struggling at work like she can't cope and then like she's just like everything is just falling apart for her and when you have like you are trying to like do like we're talking about Xiao Jing she because her mom like basically falls apart mentally and to a certain extent I think physically because she stops looking after herself she assumes the responsibility of the parent and that's such a hard thing for a teenager to do like you're
Mhm.
worrying about school you have to keep up your grades and your mom expects you to keep up your grades but then it's like you're not being a mom right now you're not looking after me how do you expect me to do all of these things and still become a good student and what happens is that Xiaojing has to stop going to school but then she learns about finances and she learns about mortgages and how to like sell a house and all of these things and like she knows about her mother's financial situation way too young way too early and I
Yes.
want you to like talk about that part of the film because I think that's like I think it's so interesting how they show because I don't think it's very rare that we see something like this in a film where like we've seen teenagers that have to tend to their parents and all of this stuff before but this is the first time I think I've seen a like a director have specific scenes with like the daughter
Financial aspects.
yeah, going to like the bank. She's going to the bank and she's like, what am I supposed to do? And the banker's like, you have to bring my mom. She's like, I can't bring my mom. My mom is in a hospital.
Yeah, I remember when, thank goodness it didn't happen as a child, but um I had to actually get a letter to bring to the bank to verify that I would like give me permission to access my mom's account because she couldn't. So I had to get like written permission, get it notarized, all this, bring in the letter, and it's stressful because you understand the level of security that obviously the bank is just doing their job, they're protecting their client and everything, but at the same time you're in your head you don't really, it's like the way she was feeling both at the hospital when she's trying to visit her mom and dealing with the bank and everything. It's like I have so much going on my plate right now. Like, do you not see that this doesn't need to be added to it? You see, can't you see I'm already upset, I'm already stressed, I'm terrified, this is not something I expected to have to do. Like, cut me some slack. So I they really did a good job in that because I liked how they not only showcased the her having to grow up and assume these responsibilities, but also showed still at the end of the day there were things like, because more often than not when somebody's mentally ill they're written off as not knowing what they're talking about. They're when they go to doctors and everything else, it's a fighting battle to get a doctor to listen to you and take what you're saying seriously regarding your dosage, medications, different things like that, because they automatically go, well, they're mentally ill, so they don't really know what they're talking about. But they showed that her mom may have a mental health issue, but she still knows what she's talking about to a large degree when it comes to certain things. Like when she asked her daughter, like, maybe we should get a second opinion before we sell everything to this person. So I really liked that they showed both aspects, that they showed, crazy is like how the world sees mentally ill people, but mentally ill does not mean you can't do anything or you can't give an effective answer to a question. So I love that they showed that aspect as well, because a lot of the time it's not depicted that way. It's one or the other.
Yeah, no, I agree because like that scene that like you're talking about, that's like when because the mom, and this is where we also find out that like mental illness isn't something that just happens. Like it's a
It,
progression of
Yep.
things, and it can take a while, and then eventually it does reach like a boiling point where everything just starts to overflow. But like this film does show, it doesn't show from the beginning, but then you get the scene where you realize, oh wait, this is something her mom has been struggling with for so long, but but Xiaojing herself didn't know. And the only reason she found out is how long her mom was struggling with it was is like, oh, the mortgage hasn't been paid, like you guys are like
In
6
months. Yep.
and then the housekeeper's like, I haven't been paid in 3 months, right? And then, but the mother hasn't been able to manage those things financially, but she's still been able to cook for Xiaojing because that's a priority for her, right? She still kept the house clean because that's a priority for her. She's like, my life outside this house is chaos, but I'm gonna try to do my best to make sure that this home is inside all of this darkness. I'm gonna try to hold on to as much control as I can. And she's like, I'm gonna make sure my daughter's fed. I'm gonna make sure her clothes are clean. You know, I'm gonna make sure the house is clean, the car is clean, and then like, but then when Xiao Ding realizes, oh, these things have been falling apart slowly for a while, then you get more hints that things have been wrong. Like the car, like which I found is that such an interesting straight progression. Is like once we as the audience and Xiao Ding understands her mom has been struggling for so long, things start to escalate. Like the mom gets in a car accident, right? Like,
Yes.
and then she goes to work and finds out her mom had to quit her job because she wasn't able to perform at work, and like they were cutting back, and she was like, I'm willing to take a 70% pay cut so I can stay to work because she's
It was
desperate.
yeah.
Just
That was
wants.
a large pay cut.
I was like, girl, 70%.
You yeah, sis, no, go elsewhere, please. The other part that I found so interesting was because a lot of the time they don't depict per se the mental health issue with the hallucinations, if a person has hallucinations. And I did like that in the beginning too, because at first, like, you think you see what's happening, like the daughter doesn't get along with the mom, she's being mean, like, oh my god, did she really write bitch on that plate?
I
Like,
know. I was like,
dang, girl,
girl,
you going off, like, why would you say that about your mom? But then after she leaves the house, because she checks Xiaoqing's room and sees that no one is there, and then she leaves the house in a storm and she's looking for her, there's just torrents of water. Then we realize that there was no water, which effectively tells us most likely her daughter was there the whole time for some reason. She just didn't process seeing her there. So that's when you're at the point where you're like, okay, this is going in a different direction than I anticipated. Okay, but wow. And a lot of the time people don't realize, unless you ask them, you won't know what they see.
Yep.
So I'm wondering where they did get that from. If it was just part of the symbolism with the like rain and stuff, or if they talk to mental health patients to kind of get an idea of what they see at times. I know that wouldn't be like a majority consensus, but I'm just curious, like, what research was done
You
for
can
it.
have like for you can have like for me, I don't have like visual hallucinations, but I can have like auditory hallucinations. Like I hear
Oh,
things.
okay.
Like, you know, like I sometimes I'll hear like my sister, I'll hear like my sister's voice. I'm like, did you say something? She like, I didn't say a word. She like, I, you know, and like you hear like a weird sound, and but nothing as dramatic as what Ping Wen experienced, right? You know, like she had
Yeah.
like full on like visual hallucinations where she saw, and I think what that also represented was I think that was also a manifestation of what she believed Xiaojing felt for her. I think she thought that Xiaojing hated her, right? I think she thought that like her daughter didn't like her, that her daughter didn't want to be around her. So that kind of manifested in this behavior that she thought her daughter was exhibiting, which is like the cursing, the slamming of the doors. Like she had arguments with Xiaojing, and like then we realized these arguments are all taking place in her head. And I
Yeah.
think I think a lot of that was just like that's what she believes is happening. That like she has so much, I think, guilt about her relationship with her husband that she thinks that her daughter blamed her for the marriage falling apart because like, in later in the end of the film you realize that she thought that if her husband didn't want her, that meant that her daughter didn't want her
Didn't want
also.
her either.
So like that kind of like manifested that way.
Yeah. I could not stand
It's trash.
The dad. And I also wonder because we don't 100% see it in the film, but given his behavior and given that he was also asking his daughter to keep his seat, like to acting in that manner. And so I'm wondering in the relationship, how much gaslighting did Pinwin go through? Because, you know, a certain amount of gaslighting can make you feel to an extent like you are mentally losing it, because you're like, oh, I guess I always blow things out of proportion. I guess I always like assume the darkest thing and accuse people of stuff. And I'm wondering how much he did that and contributed to her mental health deteriorating to that extent.
I think he did it for a while because like we find out that he had a son, not just a baby,
And
but
yeah, he's not young.
a full whole child, like a whole child that's like what, 9, 10 years old.
Yeah. I always the part that makes me so angry, and I just seen this recently in a video game too, is when people ask you to keep a secret, knowing that your loyalty is not to them or it's to both parties. And it's even worse when you ask your child to keep a secret for you, to favor you over their other parent. I'm just like that. Once you do that, I'm just like, you're wholesale trash. Like the whole bin, throw it all out.
Right. Like a whole child, like 9 years, like which means, and like then we understand, like as I love that show, Jane Angst same point. Like she's like, did my mom even know that you have a child with this woman? And the only reason she doesn't tell the mom is not because of the dad, but she realizes that if she tells her, her mom will completely fall apart. That she knows that will destroy her mom. But then that you mentioned the gaslighting, and that's such a good point because like I think that's a lot of it. That's where she starts to, that's a lot of it ties into like her relationship to Sheldon, because like she believes that her daughter thinks this way about her. Like imagine what he must have been telling her all of these years. Like he was like, every time she said, okay, did you do this, he's like, no, I didn't do it. And like he tells her over and over, makes her doubt herself so much. And then like she's also covering for him because she wants Xiaojing to think of her father in a positive light. She doesn't want her to think of her dad as like a cheater. She doesn't want, like, you know, like she's and it's just like that probably is like all of these years, all that built up in her head. And then like she's stuck at home with COVID. She's in this dark, depressive atmosphere, this dark, depressive place, and just like she's in this house, the house that they bought, the house that they built together as a family. And like, the person that she bought this house with is not there, and her daughter has to quarantine herself from her because of the COVID, and she's just like she's like what am I supposed to do?
Yeah, she's like, I'm completely alone. I have nobody. He didn't want me. She's quarantining, but is she staying away because of quarantine, or is she staying away just because she hates me that much? Just like her dad's not here. Xiaojing probably doesn't want to be here around me either. So yeah, I felt bad for the mom once I realized that it was to that degree. Well, I felt bad when I initially thought her daughter was putting
like wow
on plates. I was like, okay, I get like mother-daughter relationships are complex. I get it, but it would never occur to me to write or say that on my angriest day with a parent. And especially in teenage years, it gets really, you know, you're moving toward adulthood, there's hormones, your emotions are a lot more heightened. So even in those angry, grungy, like goth days, it wouldn't occur to me to even think it. So I was like, dang, she said it. And now I'm like, maybe she didn't. Probably the mom thought she did because she feels like her daughter hates her to an extent. It doesn't want to be around her, and she doesn't know how to communicate or reach her daughter and everything. So I felt bad at that point. I was like, oh. And then the pain switched to more toward the daughter because even if it didn't take place, in her mind it did. In her mind it happened and everything. So when she starts being a little mean to her daughter, like when she spit, I was like, and the way her daughter just kind of stood there and was like, okay, just kind of took it. I was like, oh, you poor girl. I was like, your mom needs help her.
Yeah, the thing is with that scene, what I think is super interesting is I think like what the writers did, what um Chung Mong-hong did so I think so flawlessly and so subtly is that he actually switched the perspectives. Like they actually switched almost like personas. Like the mom became the daughter. She then took on like this teenage persona. And like Xiaojin became like the mom. She's the adult now. And that actually came out in their behavior. Like we talked about like
Yep.
Xiaojin having to manage the finances and learning how to like basically balance the books
And
and like, take care of
the
the
mom Pinwen is playing games with her friends,
she's
her
playing games with
teenager.
Xiao Jing's friends. Like she came home, she playing on the Wii. Can't remember the last time I saw someone playing the Wii, but like they were playing the Wii, and then like they had like a pizza dinner, and she's talking with the kids like they're teenagers, like they're on her level, or she's on theirs actually. She's like
Even
she's
her
off a
her
bit.
questions, Pinwen's questions felt very like teenage. Like, what did you tell them about me? What are you gossiping about me? Kind of an attitude. And I was just like, oh dear.
Yeah, she became a teenager. She was just like, and this even the spitting. That's like a like that she became rebellious. Like she's like I'm in my rebellious teenage year
This
phase.
is why I think of taking my pills. Like,
Right?
take
Like,
that.
I'm like, okay, but which I think is so interesting because like she really like Pingwan like really became like a teenager. Her mental state dropped to that of a teenager. And I thought it was such a fascinating way to show like how stress can affect like people differently. Like that was she was under so much stress and then like we were talking like Xiaojing had to take on the persona of a parent. Like when we talk about parents, like Sunny's parents, like they have to take like they're when their kids act out and are rebellious, they're just like I can't do anything about it. Like I what am I gonna do? I can't shout at you because that's only gonna make the situation worse. I can't fight with
Yep.
you. Right? So she's just like,
Yep.
"Ah, okay, I'm gonna go wash you. They send the kids home, and when like you come, I'm gonna go wash the wares like the mom would, you know."
Yep.
So that was an
Basically.
interesting way to do it.
I felt bad for both of them. You know what else was kind of cute? Oh, I forgot the actor's name. The when Pinwin starts working at the supermarket,
Yeah.
the guy,
Hmm. The
mm,
manager. That was so cute.
that was that was cute. I was like, the way judging was mocking and making fun of him towards the end, and he walked right.
I know. It's just
I
like,
was like, oh dear, oh dear. But she's a teenager, and teenagers are going to, especially when you're trying to heckle your mom, like, ooh, love interest.
yeah.
So that was adorable. I also wondered about the fire, the fire that took place because in the I liked the fact that they didn't necessarily tie everything, like every action is, going to fall apart because her mental health and everything, her mental state is falling apart. And it sounded like, I mean, I'm not 100% sure, but she said that the fire was an accident that she was cooking for her daughter. Because at first I had thought that it was intentionally set and everything. So it turned out to be an accident. So I was happy when they said that. And the other part that stood out to me was I'm trying to remember the
Mm.
snake scene. I really, again, I love how too many times when somebody has a mental health issue, not only doctors, but sometimes even family kind of writes off anything you say. They don't trust it. And even though she woke up, Xiaoting woke up and sees her mom just sitting there. Apparently, she sat there all night. Pinwood sat there all night watching the TV, which is off. But she's like, what are you doing? And she's like, there's a snake back there. And she's like, is there? And she starts to approach and she's like, don't, and everything. She has enough faith in her mom that she's like, we're gonna call, the fire department, everything, let them know that there's a snake. And then I love that the building manager had to eat his words.
Yeah.
Pulled out that snake. Like, now what? I was happy. I was happy. I hate when people act like that, and they act like it's such a hardship. Like, again, like you guys are bringing so much drama to the building. It's just the fire truck checking for a snake. What drama?
Yeah. It's like would you prefer me to be wrong? And then we have a problem. And then like I actually really love the metaphor of the snake. I think it's a really good metaphor because I think it represents two things. Like the one when she watches it, she's like you mentioned, she sits there the whole night, and like you think like she's like probably in like some kind of fugue state, you know, like she's kind of checked out, and she's not, but she's not. She's very aware of what's going on, and like it doesn't occur to her to call like the police or call animal control or anything, but she does know that she can't take her eyes off this snake, because she's like,
To protect
if I
her
take my
daughter.
eyes off this snake, I don't know where it's gonna go, and it can go and
Yep.
harm my daughter. She's like, I'm gonna
Mm-hmm.
sit here and watch this thing all night. And
Yeah.
I thought that's such a great metaphor of, like we talked about how like people in like with mental illness can they may be unable to function in one way, but they're also very much aware on how to do certain things in a specific way. And she knew, she was aware enough, like, I this thing is dangerous and I can't take my eyes off of it. But then the other metaphor I love for it is like when the fire department comes and he's talking, he said, like, you've been doing these renovations here, how
It
long?
went up the.
Got in here because of you, because you had the scaffolding here for so long, like the snakes are getting in like all over the place. And I kind of saw that as representation for how things can just like slowly slither into like homes. Like, it kind of like, to me, it kind of represents like how, if I'm like being extremely metaphorical here, like how like distress, you know, like distress
Can
of
build
like,
over time and
yeah,
kind of.
like can creep in over time, and then you don't see it, but then like someone who does see it is watching it, but no one else is believing them that there's this dark thing there bothering them, like that's being a potential danger to the family.
Yeah, no, I agree with that because a lot of the time with mental health, it's almost implied with most people who don't know much about mental health that you're either mentally ill or you're not. There's
Mm.
a whole in between there.
Yeah, it's a
And not everyone is born with mental health issues. Life experience, certain trauma, certain mistreatment, even marriage, gaslighting, microaggressions, eventually it can take a toll and everything, and you can't end up having a problem in the future. Like, just because that's why I was arguing with somebody about regular mental health checks for people who are licensed to carry firearms. They should have regular mental health checks. You may be fine 1 year, but next year, depending on what's going on in your life, you may be a threat. You may be dangerous to a lot of people. I did like that they show that it can happen over time, and sometimes it doesn't have to be a huge trauma or event. It can be a whole bunch of little things that, if not properly addressed, can pile on over time. And so I really enjoyed the way they showed both sides, because I saw with the daughter, I was like, okay, I see kind of, me assuming the responsibility of like a parent when I don't have no kids, dang it. But I also saw the other side, and I've seen, like, there are times where if I'm not physically present there, uh the mental health issue is not taken seriously, and what my parent is saying isn't taken seriously.
Yeah. So like we are talking about like metaphors, like the snake is a metaphor. We've talked about the water and the blue. Like, speaking about those, there's one thing that I thought was really interesting. So when Shanjing eventually she had to be admitted to a mental hospital, like, for assessment and treatment. And what she was
Shaoqing? No, you mean Pinwen?
what I said, Shanjing? Oh, sorry. Right. So Xiaojing, sorry. So I don't know. So Pingwan was eventually admitted to a mental hospital. It happened a couple times, but she was admitted into one for treatment and for assessment. And while there, she met this woman who would sing in like the hallways at night. And this is like another person where, like, when you're looking at them, you think everything is perfectly fine, and like she has a beautiful voice, and you think she's singing possibly to like calm herself, or just to keep herself busy. But then Pin Wen runs into her at the supermarket that she's working at, and they sit down and they have lunch. And like the friend talks about the reason she was singing. She wasn't singing for herself, she was singing for the voice that she heard. Like, she used to hear voices, and there was one, she said there was one voice that she heard, and like she thought of it as a friend. But then eventually she realized that this voice was telling her things, like negative things, like possibly like giving her suicidal thoughts, which is another reference to Penguin hearing the sound of the waterfall. And that's where Penguin actually realized that what she was hearing all along wasn't normal. Like, she realized that this is a something that
Yeah.
was actually a symbol of something negative in her life, which I thought was really good, because sometimes like even like we're talking about mental illness, but it's not only just mental illness, like but like people can have like issues in their families, in their relationships, in their work life, and then sometimes they don't think that anything is wrong until someone talks to them, right? Until they realize, oh wait, so this isn't normal.
Yeah.
Hearing the sound of waterfall all the time is not normal. And I thought,
Very, very true. No, very, very true. Because even with families and, and signs of abuse and everything, the only time, majority of the time, children or even spouses can realize that it's abuse is when they're talking to others and they realize, hey, this isn't the standard. This isn't how it's supposed to go. This is not normal. This is not okay. So maybe it's because sometimes we're too close to different situations, and so when we argue, we're so used to certain arguments, and we see it as minor, and we don't realize that it's festering underneath, but we see it, we're like, okay, this is a minor issue. And then when you talk to somebody else and you get some perspective, you realize this is actually a big deal.
Mhm.
I may have been made to believe it wasn't, but this is an issue, and now something needs to be done. I did like that scene. I love that lady singing.
And her voice is amazing.
So good. I was happy that they met up after the hospital too, because I don't see that enough in films that I've seen. It's like they know each other in the hospital, and then it's
Yeah.
And she came in at a time where I think Pinwan needed to hear that. She came in at just like the right moment for her.
I also think it was important because like till that moment you don't realize that Pinwen doesn't have any other relationships, apart from like her boss and like her supervisor, and like and even like the supervisor at the supermarket. She has no personal friends. She has no one to talk to, and that's like the first person that we've seen her actually interact with that's not a family member or a work colleague. And then like I think it's important that she finally has a friend that she can keep in contact with, but she also has a friend who understands if something's going wrong, that she can relate to, that she can talk to, and who has a similar experience for them. Because a lot of the times that when we think about adult relationships, like and this is something we talk about on like Twitter all the time, is like having people that you can talk to and that who understands where you're coming from, whether it's someone working the same industry like we do, like we work in the same film criticism and journalism industry, but then also like people who understand mental illness and who understand it from a personal perspective and not just from an abstract perspective, like just from like reading stuff, but like someone who understands you, but then also someone that she can talk to just like random things about. And like I think that was important for her, because once you see like she starts to have develop these relationships, the tone of the film changes. It becomes very hopeful. And one of the symbols of that is like the tarp outside the building finally gets removed. And it gets removed after the snake is discovered. After the snake is discovered, like you can tell that the building supervisor, he got reprimanded by the fire department. Like the fire department guy was like, yeah, like you keeping this tarp up in here, like you need to like start this issue. Like you've been doing renovation for how long, and this tarp has been here. Like fix your building and get it removed. And like the tarp slowly, like I love that scene where like bit by bit the construction workers are taking down the tarp. And I kind of saw that as a symbol of like every time they like the tarp move further and further down, like that's when like Pinwen, her relationship with Xiaojing started to get better. Like each day was like a brand new day, and then it eventually got removed, and like the apartment is flooded with light. And this was the first time we actually got to see like how colorful the apartment is. Like it has like artwork, and it has all of these books and these painting, like these photographs, and it's like a beautiful apartment. But we couldn't see it before because it was just all shrouded
dreary. It's all shrouded in the tarp. I like that part. The other part that I liked was I liked the positive trajectory that it was heading in, because like you said, that was like her first friend or contact outside of family and coworkers. And even the family and coworkers, like she has her daughter who she thought really didn't want anything to do with her. She has her ex who she calls for help So it seems like even though they are not together, because she still, one, thinks they're getting back together, and two, she doesn't have anyone else. She's reaching out to him as her support system.
And he's
And
no good.
he's trash. He's just I'd curse, but
He is awful.
refrain. He's
so
a horrible human being. So that's why it was great seeing her finally start to, and sometimes high profile jobs that are very, very, I mean, there needs to be a lot of changes with these jobs, these 40, 50, 60, 70 hour plus work weeks, where you're treated more like a product yourself than actual person, because that's not conducive to good mental health for anybody. You can only be treated like an object, but for so many times before you kind of get fed up and you start to take it personally, you start to internalize it, and then you start to have issues. So I think the husband portion, now ex, was part of it, but Pinwin's job too, and the way that they like those trash garbage flowers that they gave.
Let's talk about it. Like, she been there for how long? 10 what?
Right, I was just thinking, I've seen this iteration of this BS online, in movies, everywhere. It's like, thank you for your 70 years of service working with us. Here's your gift card to like Target.
And a bouquet
of flower. And a bouquet of flowers, maybe chocolates if you're lucky. So that doesn't help either. And so I love the relationship aspect between Pinwen and Xiaojing, but I also love the way that they explore connections or lack of connections in different places, like with her job, her husband, who you would think would be connecting, who would be close for her, that's your ex, but that's still, you were together with her, you both made a child and the daughter, but sometimes the connections aren't always those that are closest to us or those that we hope for. Sometimes the connections that will help us and better serve us are random people that we meet or we get to know, and in jobs where we wouldn't expect to, per se, especially if you're coming from a whole high profile job and now you're working in just a grocery store. And I also loved how Pinwin understood that she needed to start doing something. She couldn't be home. Sometimes the worst thing is to be idle with your thoughts. So keeping busy at least helps you in that aspect, because I went through a bout of sadness maybe like 10, 15 years ago, and I had no problem at work during the day, functioned fine. When night came and then nothing was around to distract me, that's when I was in my like sad place, like almost every day. So being busy, having a project, having something to do can be extremely beneficial. There's a fine line between having something to do and having something that's putting added pressure on. So she was in a place where the job had added pressure. Clearly, they don't care about their employees. And now she's at a job where it seems like the manager cares and does care for her. So.
Yeah, that's the thing, like, and I think that's also another way how the pandemic plays into the film, because this is something I was discussing recently that I've been talking about recently, is there's films made in the pandemic that are about the pandemic, and then there's films that have been made during the pandemic but are not about the pandemic. And I love how this film makes it about the pandemic without making it about the pandemic. And and it's talking about how like the pandemic can affect different people differently. And I think for Xiaojing, for her, it was like, like you had like you got that moment of like how dangerous the pandemic still is, how dangerous the virus is, because like her classmate, one of her classmates tested positive. So, and this was someone she was hanging around with, so she had to quarantine herself in her room. And like I think that I love that they put that in, because like for so many things in real life, like so many people are forgetting that this pandemic is still ongoing, that this virus is still dangerous, and like people still have to be quarantining themselves, because of infection and possible infection. So like you had that reminder because like you were seeing people walking around on the streets. Everyone is wearing a mask, but everyone is going about their daily lives and doing these things. But then you still have this moment of where, remember, this is still a dangerous situation we're all in. Like it can potentially be fatal because like just had that one moment of like fear, like if something happens to Xiaojing, what will Ping Wen do? Which comes back around at the end, right? Because
Yep.
like the kids are like they're going on a field trip.
Things seem so innocuous. The like it like the COVID
Mm,
where she's like, I have to quarantine. That's the part where you're like scared because you're like, oh no, like this is serious. This is
mhm.
COVID. And then an innocuous field trip that seems like, hey, no problem. It's just her and her friends going to like this mountainy area. And that's where the actual danger winds up being.
Exactly.
I was so upset in the show. I was like, no, don't trick me.
But this is I love writing like this because like if there is as I mentioned Hong Chung Mong did another film previously for that came out 2019 called Isun, and that film is kind of like that where you think there's this one that you think that this one situation is going to be where all the drama comes from. This is where
Ah,
the danger is going to come, and then like bam, out of nowhere it's like, wait a minute, this came out like complete out life. You're just like, and you're left like, what is happening?
I
And he
think it's like, I
but he
don't
does it,
hate it,
and he does
but
it
I'm just like, you
right.
tricked me. I'm like, you tricked me.
Yeah, and he does it in such a smart way because like the shirt, remember like I paid attention to this. Like Xiaojing has a shirt and she's wearing this shirt that says "Don't sweat it." And I'm like, oh, we're taking this as a sign that yes, everything is fine now.
Yep,
Like they're back on track as mother and daughter.
yep, that's
Like
true.
Ping Wen's life is slowly getting better. She has a stable job. She's found her new relationship. She's found a new friend.
She's moved out of that toxic memory home.
Yeah, they moved out. She said good riddance to the ex-husband, you piece of trash. And then she and like applause and like and Xiaojing, she's like going to field trips with her friends again because she had to drop out of school like to look after her mom. And she's back at school preparing for graduation. And
Yep.
they're like, oh, you're just like a breath of fresh air. Like the film is gonna end on a high note. No, he said no. We're gonna bring back that whole metaphor of a rain, of waterfall, of doom and gloom. My
Well,
God, and he puts it right to the end, like pushes it right to the end of the film because you're just thinking, oh God, spoiler, Shao Jing died. What the hell will this do to Ping Wen? Like she's gonna completely like just like
yeah,
be
I was
destroyed.
scared.
I was so scared. I'm like, no. I cried. I started to cry. I'm like, oh
I
no.
hate that when you show me that it's going in a positive direction. I'm like, okay, okay, we're getting there. It's getting good. Oh, they're in a good place. And then it's like, I was like, no, y'all better not. Y'all better not do this. I was like, no, no, oh my God, no.
Yeah, and this is where like I have to talk about the performance of Alyssa Chia, who plays like Pinwin. Like her that scene, like she like both her and Wang did an amazing job like throughout the whole film. But that last scene, those last sequences, like because the perspective changes from focusing on her to focusing on like the waterfall and the news telecast, and you see her face, like she goes from confusion to this sense of trepidation, and then you just see her like her you can see her brain starts to like slowly just like begin to
Make the
slowly
connection.
kind of like check out like, and she does such a fantastic job because it's so much in her eyes. And then just like right before the camera cuts, right before the screen goes black, you see like the rescuers
The
bring
news.
Xiaojing out of the water. She's wearing the shirt and saying don't sweat it, and she's drenched. And then you just get that last scene on Alyssa's eyes, and it's just like that moment of just like utter relief. And then the screen goes black. I'm like that right there. I'm like that's amazing. Like woo! I was like oh, that was so good because my heart was in my throat. I was like, my heart was
Yeah,
pounding.
same. I was very scared. I was like, please don't do this. Please don't go this route. Please don't go this route. I hate when they do that. I'm like, just leave it beautiful, leave it hopeful at the end. Please don't. I mean, it's different if I go in expecting like this is gonna be dark. There's probably not gonna be a happy ending, but I was like, this looks like it's going in a good way. Don't let me down, please.
know. It was like I'm like, they've been through too much. They've been
Right.
through too
I
much.
hate that. Like all of this and it works out. The only another movie that reminded me a little of that, I forgot the name. It's an American film. It was very controversial and I hadn't seen it till maybe a couple of years after it had come out because I'd heard so much negative things about it. Um was like, what was it? American History X with Edward Norton, I think it was.
Oh yeah,
Ed,
I've
Ed,
never seen that one, but I know, yeah, I remember that one.
yeah. I hadn't watched it initially because I'd heard so many things about it, and it's very bold in its tackling of the issue of racism and everything. But as the film develops, the character starts to unpack all of his issues and biases and the hypocrisies you see in your own group and everything. It's, we talk about all these things that we see with like the GOP or like sometimes with white people saying one thing, it's not okay, you can't force me to wear mags, like my rights, my rights, my rights. The other day I saw somebody comparing vaccination with diet, and they were like, I wouldn't tell you like how to diet, and bad dieting kills more people than COVID. And I'm just like, but they'll say that, but then they'll also want to push their beliefs onto society. They want to dictate like uh women a woman's body and whether or not they can. So I'm like, I don't like that hypocrisy. So as he started noticing that, he was changing and it was going in a almost hopeful direction. And then, yeah, it just pulled the rug out from under me. I haven't watched that thing in like, I don't
It's,
know. It's been a
it's
long
probably
time.
like 20 years old now, right? Because
Right? It's probably super old. I don't remember how long ago and everything, but yeah, that ending was like, really? I was like, y'all really gonna do it like that? So, and I was like, at the very least, if you're gonna take out somebody, take out his character.
You're like, take the worst one up, please.
Yeah, even if he did develop and change, take him out. I can understand that because at the end of the day, even it's that whole discussion of it, like, can people be redeemed and whether or not they have a right to be redeemed. Like, just because you can redeem yourself or you can turn over a new leaf, that doesn't negate all the harm you caused prior to that change, and you're still accountable for whatever harm you committed. So um yeah, so that was the vibe. I was like, y'all better not give me that vibe. Y'all, she better survive. I was looking like a hawk for that shirt. Every person that
Me
came out,
too.
I was like, what shirt was that? So
I was the same way. I'm like, if they bring her out on a stretcher,
I was like, please, y'all better not. Y'all better not. Everything is going because it doesn't need it didn't need that bad ending either, because it's not perfect. They walk into the sunset, everything is roses. It's we got through this part and we're still trying, but there's hope for us now. There's hope that things can be better. We're making slow changes and slow progress, and that's what I liked. It wasn't like the fairy tale happy ending nonsense. It wasn't dark. It was just what it was.
yeah, I agree. Because as you said, it's not a perfect end. It's not a like happy ending because like you realize like Pinguin is always gonna be struggling with mental illness. This is not something that's just magically going to go away. Like
And
she
there's
can
gonna
have
be
like yeah, it'll be up and
uh-huh.
down, and that's something that like I think the film like hints at very subtly. Like one of the things that I really like is like when as she starts getting better, she starts acting more like a mom, right? She starts asking Xiaojing about wearing what clothes she's wearing, where she's going before, because like while she was disassociated, like she didn't care. She wasn't asking these kind of questions. But then she's asking, she's like making she's like, do you have your bus pass? Do you have enough money? You know, she's acting like a mom again. But
Yeah.
then it's just like you're like the film reminds you like anything could be a trigger, anything could set Pinwang back, and it could be like, God forbid, something happens to Xiaojing, what could happen in the future. So I like the film gives us like that happy ending, but it's not like completely happy ending, because like mental illness is a struggle. It's something, it's a daily thing that you have
Yeah.
to be, that you have to cope with. And like not only does Pinwang, but Xiaojing and anyone in their life is gonna have to cope with, because like she does talk about it with the supermarket supervisor, the guy she's dating. Like she does talk, and I love that she's open about it too. Like she says, I'm this is something that I'm dealing with, and he doesn't judge her for it. He's just like, okay, there's just a
Yeah.
part of that. This is just something about you that I'm gonna have to learn how to handle and how to deal with, right? And it's just like
Yeah.
they have that conversation, and then that's it. Like it's not, it's like not like this big dramatic moment. He's just like, I suffered mental illness. I was in an institution for like a few weeks getting treatment, and he's like, okay.
And I love that I love that the film does explore mental illness, because a lot of the time, even in the United States, still there's always a stigma around mental health. The if you were stronger in your mind, you know, you wouldn't have this issue. And I remember, I don't know how long ago it was. I don't think it's the same now, but I remember that like South Korea used to have like a very high suicide rate. I don't know if it's the same. It still does.
They still do. I because
Because
I
I remember they would say after celebrities would commit suicide, there would all of a sudden be a rash of suicides based off those celebrities. And now they have like that highlighted bridge or something because people were killing themselves on that bridge
they
and
have
stuff
bridges
like
that
that.
have like, on all of their bridges, they have signage that offer like phone numbers to call for like suicide prevention. If you want, if you need help, like outreach, you call a number. They have like phone booths like on all their bridges, like at like regular intervals. Like if you're here, you can like step and you can call someone. They have numbers. They have like sign. They have like people put inspirational signage, like saying like if you need help, like reach out. If you like saying like today's about tomorrow's a better day. Like just like offer inspiration.
Because I remember them in Japan. I just don't remember which one was number one recently.
Japan has like an extremely high suicide rate too. And I do remember last year there was a report that was said because of the pandemic, because people were unable to cope with quarantine, a lot of people were committing suicides.
That's true too.
And then like late 2019, early 2020, there were quite a few celebrity suicides, unfortunately. But the thing is like it like mental health illness is I'm sorry mental health issues are still stigmatized all around the globe. It's still
Hmm.
stigmatized in Asia. Like this film is a Taiwanese film. It's still stigmatized in Asia. It's still stigmatized in like the Caribbean. It's still stigmatized in North America, Europe, everywhere, because
Is there any place that normalizes it enough?
I don't know. Like, no, I think is that it's not normal getting normalized. I think just people are feeling more comfortable talking about it more openly, and like in films and in shows, like because we both watch like Korean dramas, like they are mentioning it more in Korean dramas as a positive, because before someone would mention, they would like refer to somebody as a psycho or crazy or a sociopath, and not that the person is like an actual sociopath, but there's like someone would say things, you're just like, you're crazy, and I'm like, I realize that it's be happening less and less in dramas now, like where you just like randomly refer to someone as being crazy, and it's just like, no, if that, like, because there are more shows like it's okay to not be okay.
I
um
haven't watched that yet. I gotta
it's
watch
so
that.
good. That one is so good. That one made me cry, but that one talks not
Oh
only about mental
no.
illness, it
I
talks
got
about trauma, it talks about people, neurodivergent people, because like one of the main characters is autistic, and then there's also Search WW talks about mental illness as well, and then there was it's okay to be melodramatic. I love that drama. Be melodramatic is so good. It's not on Netflix. That one's on Viki, and they talk a lot about mental illness. They talk about um depression, like severe depression and grief, and how grief and trauma can affect people mentally. And
yeah.
that one has a beautiful subplot about this character. Her fiance died, and like she just like what she did what Penguin did. She disassociated. Like she imagined like like her fiance is still, and it broke my heart. But they handle it so beautifully. Like they write it so beautifully. And that one's really good. And like South Korean dramas are getting better. Like the writers are getting better at addressing mental health issues, and even if it's not a main part of the plot, like if there is a character who has mental illness or is referred to, it is being handled, I think, more sense. It is
With
being handled better.
sensitivity.
Yeah, with better sensitivity and compassion. And same thing with like Korean, like Thai or Taiwanese, excuse me, or Japanese or Chinese, mainland China dramas. Like they're getting better at the dialogue and like the words used to reference these things. It's no longer just like insulting comments made about it. It's like having
Oh
to be
yeah, because
sensitive.
I got my brain is off kilter. So I forgot. I was like, this is a Taiwanese film. I forgot.
Yeah.
My bad.
No, it's okay.
Sorry.
Yeah.
My memory isn't always the greatest.
We're preaching to the choir. My brain can be. My memory is like sometimes I say one thing when I really mean something like else. Like I was doing the one with Hafa talking about part of the dog, and I was taught, and I said violin. I'm like, and as I was saying the word violin, I'm like, I know that's not the word. That's not the instrument. It was a banjo that he was playing, but my brain, because I have cognitive impairment too. But my brain does this thing is like, I call it word salad, or kind of like I call it opposites where like if I'm thinking of an instrument with a string and I know it's one thing, but my brain I can't remember the exact terminology, so my brain would just create another
A
word.
random like do
So
this one.
create another reference. So like I know
It's got strings.
yeah, I know I want to say a string instrument, so my brain is just gonna come up. My brain is gonna supply another word for another instrument with strings. So I was thinking banjo, but my mouth said violin, and I was watching when I was doing the editing. I was just like, oh wait, Carolyn, you said violin, but it was actually banjo. So it was just like my brain does that. So like when it comes to memory, like I am the same way.
For me, it's names. I used to be very good at names. I used to always be able to remember people's names. And I blame this job. People laugh, but I had a job that the turnover rate was so high because of how badly they treated the employees. And I was a part-time supervisor, so I had to train employees. We would get like 10 people in 1 week. I would learn all their names. By the next week, I had 10 new people. And it was like that for months. So after a while, I was calling people by other names from like 3 weeks ago. And then after a while, I just stopped saying people's names. I was like, when you're here longer, I'll do my best to learn your name, but it's not gonna process.
Yeah, no.
And then when I have a headache, and I still have a little one today, but it was bad for like the past 3 or 4 days. So I made so many minor mistakes that I've never made like before. So I was like messaging people going, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to send this. Oh my God, you sent it. I didn't realize I checked and I didn't know. I'm sorry. Please forgive me. Because I was just like, these are minor mistakes and I'm looking ridiculous. And even a pitch that I sent, I typed in an email wrong and had to send the pitch, and I had CC'd, the person I CC'd was the wrong email. And I had to send it again. And I was like, this doesn't look good. The first time they're hearing my name. And they got a double email. Like,
well, as long as you correct it in the second email, like I sometimes I might misspell people's names, like because I have like dyslexia, so I might misspell people's names, and I'll reply and say, "I'm so sorry. Please apologize for like me spelling your name wrong. I just want them to know like I didn't do this purposely, and it wasn't made dismissive. It's just like a mistake my brain made."
yeah,
But
and
yeah, I know like that's our brains just do weird things sometimes, and it's
and I
just like.
try to remind myself that if somebody really does have a problem, it's ultimately minor. If they have a problem, then that's a reflection on them because it's not that serious. Especially if you say, oh, "Oops, I made a mistake. My bad. Apologies." Then it should be fine after that.
Yeah.
So if they're still like, "Oh, but you spelled it," it's like, okay.
I know, I'm just like, forgive us, people. We're not doing it on purpose, okay?
Yes, yes.
Our brains are just weird. So thank you. This has been such a great conversation, Dark Sky. Thank you so much for taking this
Thank you.
time to talk with
I
me.
hope this was okay. I was so nervous and
No, you
like
did
rambly
great.
and like,
No, you did great. So before we close off, can you tell everyone where they can find you on social media and where they can find your writing?
okay. They can follow me on social, Twitter or Instagram at DarkSkyLady. And my writing, you can find my writing at my website, DarkSkyLady.com.
Yay. This has been great. Thank you so much for talking with me. And for everyone, you can find me on Twitter and Instagram at CarrieSanders12. You can find my most recent interviews, reviews, writings, podcast episodes, everything on my pin tweets, and also just search through my Twitter feeds. I have my Linktree account, which has like links for where you can find my writing, my podcast, my YouTube.
I
What
have an
else?
authory, but I forgot it.
Yeah, I have an author page. So my author page is linked on my Linktree account in my Twitter bio, and my YouTube is linked in my Instagram account. So this has been great. Thank you so much for talking with for watching us. We hope you enjoyed this discussion. If you get a chance to watch The Falls, please do. We didn't spoil as much as as it may seem. Like there's so much in this film that we didn't actually get to touch on,
Yeah,
and
have to see it.
yeah, it's a beautifully shot and filmed. It's like it seems very simply filmed, but like there's a lot of like things in the film that I think feeds a lot into story. Like there's artwork, there's like talks about art and how art is perceived, and by people who are mentally ill. And I think that's like there's this thing with this painting with Degas, and we won't get into that. But it's such a great film. I love if you and you can watch A Sun on Netflix. I think it might be on Amazon Prime too, but I'm not sure. But you can definitely find A Sun, that's A and then SUN Sun on Netflix as well. As I said, you can find my review for that on butwhythepodcast.com. This has been great. Thank you so much, Dark Sky, and everyone. Until the next episode of Carolyn Talks, be safe. Bye.
Bye.